Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Sam Metcalfe. I'm the Midlands editor of thebusinessdesk.com. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, latest webinar entitled Surviving Lockdown and Preparing Yourself for the New Normal. Today's webinar is in conjunction with Begbie's Trainer in the East Midlands. I think it's fair to say the last few weeks have been somewhat turbulent for businesses in the East Midlands. Over the course of the next 40 minutes or so during this webinar, our panel will attempt to cut through the fog of confusion for SMEs, giving best advice on what to do for your business right now, and as well as looking forward to a time when some sense of normality will resume. Here at thebusinessdesk.com, we've spoken to many businesses over the last few weeks, and what they wanted more than anything is sound advice and what help is available and what to do next. And that's our mission today. And so I'm going to ask our panel now to introduce themselves, starting with you, Carolyn.
Hey, I'm Carolyn Best. I'm one of the partners at the Leicester office, covering the East Midlands. I've been in insolvency now for almost 20 years. Thanks,
Carolyn. Julie.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Julie Palmer. I'm the Regional Managing Partner for the South West region and also Begbie's Principal Media Commentator. I've been involved in insolvency, restructuring, turnaround now for more years than I probably care to remember, but about 30.
Martin.
Hi everybody, my name is Martin Buttress. I'm a partner at the Leicester office of Begbie's Trainer. I've been working in insolvency for 25, nearly 30 years, primarily advising SME owner-managed businesses.
Okay, thanks to our panel there. Just a reminder to people tuning in today, if you've got a question for our panelists, you can ask them, and we'll put them on the spot a little bit. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and to submit one, and we'll try and get to you over the course of the next half hour, 40 minutes or so. If we don't have time to get through all those questions, we'll be providing you a way to contact the panel after the event. Okay, let's kick off. Julie, like you said, you've got vast experience, but in your experience, have business owners during this short time, have they moved on from a reactive stage of lockdown to a more proactive mindset?
Yeah, I think there's almost been 3 stages. I think the first stage was just sheer shock, even though we'd seen what was unfolding in China, or maybe not unfolding as now seems to be the case. We'd definitely seen the very sort of direct comparisons from our near neighbours in Italy and Spain. So we had a sense of what was coming, but I think then the speed at which it hit us in terms of the lockdown, which happened over the Mother's Day weekend, as I seem to recall, I think did take everybody by surprise. So the first week or two, I think, was total shock at what was actually happening and how long this might go on. I think initially everyone thought we were talking about a few weeks. Then the Thursday of the 3rd week was the proposed date for the update, and that seemed to slip, and a week was slipped in the middle. So we almost ended up then with a week and then another 3 being bolted on. And I think during that period, we went from initial shock to normal reaction, then to trying to plan what this actually meant, making some sense of all the support measures that were being rolled out, to what extent they were available for businesses, and to what extent we had to wait for the detail to see that they were technically available, but actually would the money really get to businesses. And I think as that began to unfold out, businesses then went much more into the reaction and planning phase. And I think now we're almost beginning to move into the new phase, which will be the what happens next, which seems to be the traffic lighting type system that everybody's talking about. So 3 phases already, and I suspect we're beginning to morph a little bit into that next phase at the moment, which is the real planning for the easing of the lockdown and what will then happen.
Okay, let's delve a little bit deeper into that planning then. Carolyn, do you see different sectors at different stages of this planning and different stages of the sort of crisis they've been through? Are certain firms doing better than others?
Yeah, I guess most are suffering at the moment. We're not really seeing any sort of particular trend, although having said that, we are speaking to quite a lot of businesses in the retail and the leisure sector. People are really just biding their time, using the assistance from the government in terms of the furloughing and the grants, etc., and trying to see what's going to happen next in terms of how we're going to come out of this situation. We're seeing a lot of businesses putting a positive spin on the current situation rather than looking positively to the future at the moment, by diversifying their business to try and generate income. For example, PPE for key workers, or distributing food to those in need. Restaurants providing a delivery or collection service, just trying to get through the period of time at the moment. But I think all businesses can do really to look to the future positively is try to continue to use the media channels available to keep in touch with people, to keep their businesses out there, keep in touch with clients, suppliers, employees, and see what happens.
Okay, and you touched on there the government cash and the loans, grants and the loans. We did a story this morning, you may have seen it, a top story that said 1 in 3 East Midlands businesses hasn't, received this cash yet or even notification. Is that your, is that your experience speaking to clients that don't really know what to do as far as the government cash is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think quite a few businesses have received the grants from the local authorities. It was probably a bit slow at the beginning while people were trying to get their heads around it. As Julie mentioned, people were kind of a bit in shock, not knowing really where to go and what to do. So it was a bit of trying to get through that period and learn really what was available. So a lot of businesses have received it. There are still businesses that haven't because, for example, if they're based on an industrial estate or in shared offices, and they pay their rates within their rent, unfortunately, the local authority is not seeing them as eligible because they don't pay and they're not rated as such for that. So I think that's still ongoing at the moment, but the government are reacting well to these situations in terms of things that weren't covered initially. We are seeing things changing on a daily basis to try and cover those businesses as well.
Julie, just to come back to you, is the East Midlands regional picture a sort of microcosm of the national picture, do you think? Are there any differences?
No, I mean, I think the only sort of real feature for the Midlands is it was almost unexpectedly one of the regions that was worst hit, alongside probably London was obviously the extreme case, but I think the Midlands and the North West were the two regions hit early on. I suppose East Midlands as a whole traditionally has a much more of a sort of bedrock of manufacturing type businesses. So one would hope that they would be the sort of businesses that might be the early gainers in terms of the traffic light system of easing the lockdown. And interestingly, a number of those types of businesses are already beginning to talk about getting themselves back to work before the government are even talking about it. So I would hope that that sort of concentration of the businesses around the Midlands might actually mean it's one of the regions that eases itself out of the lockdown earlier than some of the others. Notably, for example, the Southwest, which is very reliant on tourism. I think that's going to be very much at the tail end. Okay,
yeah. Martin, let's come to you. There's the old saying, isn't there, that cash is king, and this can't be more relevant than now. Is that what you're hearing really from your clients? Are they stockpiling cash or trying to?
I think most definitely. I think there's definitely a propensity for businesses at the moment to be holding on to cash wherever possible. I think a lot of businesses that I'm speaking to are finding that debtors are not paying currently, either by combination of simply not being open as a consequence of the lockdown, or indeed finding that they don't have the cash coming in from their debtors and consequently don't have the money to pass on to their own creditors. So I think cash control is something that's going to be incredibly important during the period of the lockdown. I think for businesses, wherever possible, I'd kind of recommend looking at a cash flow forecast, possibly on a weekly basis, as opposed to potentially previously doing them on a monthly basis. You're probably going to be better looking at a 13-week period for a cash flow forecast, understand where the peaks and troughs in the cash is going to come, so you can identify where the need is going to be, either for additional funding or to be taking additional advice in order to see what the options will be to get through those troughs. I think certainly we are seeing, or businesses that I've been talking to, we are seeing, as Julie suggested, being a manufacturing area, there are a lot of businesses that are beginning to kind of reopen, having assessed the way in which they can work and maintain social distancing. So perhaps working with a 50% workforce as opposed to the usual levels. So we are seeing some element reopening of manufacturing, I think, at this moment in time, and I'm sure that will continue over the coming weeks. I think in terms of cash, I think businesses need to be looking at the various help that's available, looking at the things like the rates relief and the local authority grants, taking advantage of deferral of the current quarter's VAT. All of these things will help to ease cash at this moment in time. And I think we need to preserve cash until such time as we have a clear exit strategy and what that's going to look like. And is that going to be by region? Is it going to be by sector at this moment in time? We just don't know. And I think, also there are opportunities to speak to HMRC, defer other tax liabilities as well, consider time to pay arrangements such that you can then stretch payments maybe over a 3 to 12 month period, all of which will ease cash flow in the short term until such time as businesses can start getting back up to something like the previous normals.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about, Martin, again. Are businesses reluctant to take one of the government loans? They're going to take the grants, obviously, because they're grants. Is there still reluctance to, pile debt on?
I think without doubt, at a time of such uncertainty, it would feel a risk for some businesses to be taking on the opportunities with the CBILS loans, because clearly at some point this has got to be repaid. And I think whilst there is support from the government, I think the first 12 months of interest is being supported by the government, but ultimately that is putting a burden on a business that needs to consider when they're going to be in a position to be able to make those repayments. And I think, again, the whole CBILS process is one that I think people are finding very frustrating. And it seems to be a question of who you apply to as to how quickly you get some form of response. And I think maybe people need to be aware of the fact you don't necessarily need to go to your existing bankers for those loans. You could consider other alternatives. I think there's as many as 40 accredited lenders, some of which I think would probably be more fleet-footed in terms of being responsive to those applications. So I think if people are looking at the CBILS applications, I think they need to shop around a little bit. If you have been rejected by your existing bank, you can look at alternative lenders, make a new application elsewhere.
Julie, do you think businesses are aware of that, aware that they can shop around?
I think it's been much more promoted initially. The problem initially, there were only a number of accredited lenders admitted to the scheme, and I think the government has responded to that, and the reluctance, I think, of some of the larger banks to be able to navigate their way through some of their own strict lending criteria on the viability tests was one of the real stumbling blocks. So I think it's a really positive step in terms of opening up this panel to, as Martin says, I think over 40 accredited lenders now. It's almost worth making parallel applications. Some have more of an appetite than others. Even amongst the big four clearing banks, we saw some market stats at the weekend about those that were doing much better and those that didn't seem to be doing so well and didn't even want to release the statistics. So the government definitely is trying to encourage the banks right across the piece to be more open for business. But notwithstanding that, it's key that we get the money to the right businesses, and the right businesses seem to be those that weren't having viability issues before the pandemic. They are the focus of the government in terms of where we want to get this money to. So this viability issue, or the new lighter tests that we've seen under the bounce back loans, it's still incumbent on a business to actually show that they were in reasonably good shape going into the pandemic, albeit on the bounce back loans, that they don't need to show necessarily that they are a business that's totally viable going forward.
Okay, great. We've got a question come in from Nick Mellors. Nick says, if we all defer paying debts to preserve our cash, how will we break out of the cycle? Who wants to take that one on? Martin, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the problem, isn't it? That if everybody sits on cash not paying their suppliers, then clearly we have a problem, because no cash moves anywhere and everybody has the same, we just come into a position where everything grinds to a halt. So whilst that is true, I think there has to be some element of preserving your cash, but of course there needs to be a recognition that liabilities do have to be paid. So I think you need to be looking at your suppliers and making payments where you can. And I think that there is an encouragement from the government again that particularly larger businesses that have the cash reserves should be freeing up and making payments sooner than they necessarily ordinarily would. So some larger businesses perhaps are sitting on cash and able to make these payments. So I think that, as ever, there is always a balance act between all of these things, and we will have to wait and see. I think as businesses start to reawaken, they'll then be able to start seeing some cash coming in, and we'll be able to then start releasing cash out in terms of payments due.
Caroline, just to come to you quickly, Nick's obviously conscious of this, but do you think all businesses are conscious of breaking out of the cycle, or is there a more short-term approach at the moment?
Yeah, I guess it's all the unknown, isn't it? It's uncertainty. People don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how we're going to come out of all of this. So it's, yeah, I guess there's an element of holding on to the money whilst we see what does happen. You know, the government is still trying to put plans together to come out of all of this.
Thank you. Martin, let's move on to property and landlords. In your experience and what you're seeing, are landlords being flexible with tenants and rent?
Well, certainly the people that I've been speaking to have spoken very favourably about landlords at this moment in time, which makes a nice change, I suppose. I think that they are finding flexibility with landlords and understanding from landlords. I think I've spoken to various people. Some have managed to agree deferrals to be reviewed at the end of June, which seems to be when a lot of the support measures at the moment are due to expire with the government. So a lot of deferrals. Some people I've spoken to have even managed to get complete waivers of a quarter of rent to be reviewed as we then start coming out of the lockdown. So I think ultimately it is, as ever, it goes back to the similar thing I was saying with regards to the CBILS loans. Very much depends on the attitude of your landlord, but the key is to be opening those conversations quickly and having those conversations now to try and see what can be done. I mean, similarly, I have read in the press as well of other landlords taking far more aggressive steps and still issuing statutory demands for unpaid rent. But I understand the government are going to bring forward measures to ensure that those statutory demands are removed. Winding up petitions from landlords will also be voided as well. So I think landlords are going to have to be commercial in the approach that they take. I think all that being said, landlords of course also have bills to pay as well. So I think I did read in the press today in the Times, there's an article that there's a lot of pressure coming onto the government now for landlords to be given financial support and help to be able to bridge the gap, because there'll be millions, if not billions of pounds of rent going unpaid during the current quarter. And of course, those landlords are going to need support from the government as well. And I think there is talk of some support coming, but again, as ever with this at the moment, you know, we have changing landscapes day to day, don't we? So we have to wait and see what comes forward. But certainly, I think in general, I'm seeing that landlords are being reasonable, and I would urge anybody to negotiate with their landlords wherever they possibly can. And I think landlords are going to have to take a commercial view as well, because I mean, there's currently a relief from forfeiture until the end of June, so they can't actually take forfeiture action anyway. I believe they're going to remove the powers under CRA as well in terms of being able to seize goods. So all of these things are coming through. So the landlords are going to be in a difficult position in terms of trying to enforce anyway. And the last thing they're going to want is empty premises anyway, in what's going to be an uncertain landscape, I would suggest.
Yeah.
So in their interest to go to.
Sure, thanks Martin. We've got a question on this, Julie, if you can take this. It says retail and town centre businesses with long-term leases are clearly in real trouble. Are we going to see a raft of personal insolvencies due to breached personal guarantees on lease contracts?
Well, I think that whole retail landscape, particularly on the high street, is going to be interesting to watch in all sorts of respects. So landlords in that sector were being really tightly squeezed anyway for some time leading up to this. Many might say, well, it's about time, because retailers have been through so many years of upward-only rent rises. So maybe that's just equalising a balance or an imbalance that's existed for some time. As your question asks, though, some of those smaller retailers will have given personal guarantees. The personal guarantee issue generally, I think, is going to be interesting, because a number of businesses, SME businesses, will have given lots of guarantees, not just in respect of rent, but some of the peer-to-peer lenders that we've seen taking up the space that's been vacated by the clearing banks since the financial crisis. Some of the peer-to-peer lenders, in fact, most of them, their model is based on an easy loan that's computer generated, but it brings with it personal guarantee liability. So I think the personal guarantee issue all round is going to be an interesting one, particularly for businesses at the lower end of the SME spectrum. But I think also the other interesting thing to watch on the high street space is there's a number of the landlords and the property investments are underwritten by pension funds. as there's downward pressure, and I think increasing and quite severe downward pressure on rents in the high street and some of the out of town malls, I think the whole pension landscape might come under pressure as well. But coming back to your question, yes, I think there will be some real personal guarantee issues here. And as ever, I think as soon as they start biting, I think people need to take advice, particularly at the moment, because we are in this very positive, supportive climate, I think, where people might take a different view than they might take 12 months down the line in terms of sensible discussions about these issues.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you all that, really. As you just mentioned, Julie, everybody's trying to help everybody else at the moment. Will that last? How long can that last? At some point, it's going to stop, isn't it?
It is. The whole environment's very supportive of it at the moment, but I think as we come out of it, my view about this very much is it's a little bit like surviving a war. While the war's in place, everyone goes into survival mode and does everything they can. I think the real test comes, like with a war, when you begin to emerge from it. And I think then as everybody else starts looking a bit more to help other people and actually thinking, what do I need to do to help myself at the moment? That's when the crisis might really start biting for businesses.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's only going to be brought about, Carolyn, by the government's exit plan, which we're hearing, there's so much pressure for some kind of plan. Do you think they're nearly there as far as businesses are concerned? And how do you see the government's exit plan shaping up?
Well, I guess that's slightly difficult to answer because I don't think they still even know at the moment. I believe talks are still ongoing. They're probably looking at other countries to see how that's working out at the moment in terms of the easing of the lockdown. But yeah, they are coming under considerable pressure because people want to get back to work and start to generate money coming through in terms of their businesses. I think the social distancing measures, even if we were to get back to some sort of normality, will still be in place, which will be detrimental to the leisure industry, particularly if you have, example, restaurants can only have half the people in, they're not going to turn over sufficient funds to pay all of their overheads. So those things need to be considered in the exit plan to ensure that there is support for those businesses ongoing, not just now. I think that those that can work from home will remain working from home. I believe construction has started to go back, was at the end of last week. So yeah, people are trying to come out of it to continue and start to generate income. Okay.
Julie, I've got another question from a viewer. What are you seeing with furloughing in terms of whether employers are topping up the 80% to 2,500? Is that happening on a widespread basis?
A little bit of a mixed bag. I think, furlough probably has been the most successful one of the government's initiatives in terms of real-time support to businesses managing the crisis. I think where possible, businesses are looking very sympathetically then at what they can do on top of that. And in my experience, the majority of business owners that I've spoken to, unless they really are against the cliff drop at the moment, they are, where possible, topping that up for the workers as much as they can do. Having said that, some business owners are saying, well, actually the 80% works quite nicely because a number of the workers don't have things like travel costs and some of the associated costs with working. So actually some of them are taking the view that 80% is a pretty good deal and more than enough for them to manage through. So a mixed bag, and as ever, I think those who can are trying to take a positive view of this and doing as much as they can to support the workers going forward.
Thanks, Julie. Martin, let's try and look, if we can, long term. I don't know how long term is anymore, probably about 3 weeks, isn't it? But let's say 12 months. How do you see business owners changing their long-term plans because of what's happened?
Well, I think, as you rightly say, a long time at the moment in business is probably no more than the end of the week. I think planning forward for the next 12 months is going to be potentially a bit easier when we know a little bit more about what the exit strategy will be and what that will look like. I think the big concern clearly for business at the moment is that if we do come out of the lockdown too soon and we then end up with the restrictions being put back in place, I think that will be much more damaging than the current lockdown anyway. If we end up sort of freed a little bit from it for a few weeks and then restrictions start being put back in place. And I did see in the press today that Germany are having some problems now with having eased some restrictions there reproduction rate is going up again. So that I think is something the government here will be watching very closely. I think really at this stage, what's been, as we talked about earlier, we've gone through this kind of period of shock and people are now settling down. I think we need to see this as a bit of an opportunity, really. It's an opportunity to sit down and look at the overall model of the business and give consideration to whether all elements of the business are working as well as we necessarily thought it would. And I think we're all having to adapt to new working practices. The technology we're using today, Zoom has been around for a long time, and Microsoft Teams and things like these that we're all now embracing, that perhaps whilst we were aware of them, we didn't make use of them in the way that we could have done. And I think, going forward, these things that we're adapting to will probably continue, and we'll make use of them, and there'll be efficiency savings in terms of time for travel and cost for travel, and meetings taking place much easier from either home or from your desk when we're all back in the offices. So I think these kind of changes that we're having to make are probably things that we'll look at and say, well, we can make use of that going forward and enhance the business going forward in that respect. And I also think, business owners often are just too busy working in the business day to day to be able to work on the business. And maybe this little bit of downtime that we've got at the moment will be a good opportunity to reflect on the business and think about ways in which we can change. That may be, sadly, staffing levels. I think, unfortunately, there will be casualties as a consequence of everything that's gone on. So maybe staffing levels in the business premises. If people can work from home efficiently and effectively, do we need as bigger offices we have currently? Do people look at desk sharing, and can we make savings in the size of the premises that we're working from? Are there different service lines, as we talked about? A number of places locally here, restaurants and pubs and things that relied on the food that they were serving, and now providing sort of click and collect services, so you can go and collect a meal and things like this. So these may all be things that businesses look at, trying to adapt and evolve moving forward. Businesses that perhaps have some element of online sales will be pushing that further now as a consequence of what's going on to maintain turnover. And again, that may be a shift that is something that they look at doing more long term. I think there was an article in the press with regards to Marks and Spencer who are saying that they're going to be implementing a plan going forward that includes all the changes they've had to make as a result of the current situation. They're going to adapt that going forward and evolve their business in that way. So I think we have to see this as an opportunity. The business owners in this country are entrepreneurial, and they'll see opportunities and take opportunities going forward that perhaps they wouldn't have done had this not happened.
Carolyn, if I could just come to you on that. From the discussions you're having with clients, are business owners being sensible about it? Are they really, really wanting to get back to work, or does it depend on which sector they're in, really? You mentioned restaurants earlier. I guess they desperately want to get back. Is there a more sort of measured view from everybody else?
Yeah, I think people are desperate to get back to be able to start things moving again. People are getting frustrated because in some cases there is work out there. Construction, the sites have been closed, but there is work to be done. So they're, particularly wanting to get back into it, to get builds completed, get builds started. Restaurants are looking at what they can do to try and generate some income, but it's not going to be generating as much as what they did generate previously. We've seen in the local area, there's a couple of restaurants that are actually giving meals away for free. So they are raising funds, and they've provided thousands of meals to NHS workers at the hospitals. So by doing that, although they're not making anything for themselves, they're turning it into a positive, and their business profile is still out there. So you would hope that there is some positive for them in the future as well with that. Okay, thanks, Karen.
Julie, I'm going to put you on the spot again, I'm afraid. I've got another question in from a viewer. It's not an anonymous question. It says the main four high street banks are only dealing with CBILS for existing customers. Of the rest of accredited lenders, who is still open to accept new customers?
The question is as regards to the other lenders as opposed to the non-big.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think, a lot of the challenger banks, they've been, really keen to get more of a foothold in the market at the moment. So amongst the challenger banks, if you look at the likes of Metro, Aldermore, Shawbrook, Santander, I guess, even, although I'd class those as one of the big ones now, this really does pose an opportunity for them to forge new relationships. So if people are coming to them that are main bank customers, this is an ideal opportunity. If they can get some traction going with them through the CBILS scheme or even the smaller bounce back scheme, this is an ideal opportunity to really build up a relationship, get to know that customer and see if that's some business they can pick up going forward. So they will be keen to get market share, and that gives them an ideal opportunity to do so.
Okay. And I'm going to go through you all already to sort of sum up, but please be as detailed as you can be. Judy, I'm going to come to you first. What can businesses take away from this experience? What are the positives they can take away? And I guess learn from the negatives as well that will stand them in good stead for the future. I'll come to you, Judy, first, and then maybe from a more local angle to Carolyn and Martin.
I think on the challenge side, one of the things that we often see with business owners, particularly where there's been a business failure, is they haven't necessarily planned for all the eventualities that they could have done. I think what this shows is actually when businesses have to react, and this wasn't an eventuality. It was technically there. I mean, I think everybody at some stage said, doomsday scenario, we might be facing a pandemic, but we all thought it was something on the dim and distant horizon, and as we'd seen it, it was mainly happening in Asia. It wasn't going to affect us. So I think although business owners couldn't really plan for this, I think the really positive thing has been the way that everybody has pulled together in terms of the way business owners have reacted, the government support measures that have been there very quickly, even if the money hasn't got out as quickly as they can. And I think that what that really shows as a positive is that, how entrepreneurial and robust many of these UK businesses are. We desperately rely on these entrepreneurs, the smaller businesses, to kickstart the economy. And the positive way that many businesses have reacted to this crisis, I think, shows that we do have a good news story coming out of this. If they apply the same degree of positivity and opportunistic view of this, then I think we will bounce back. Whether that will be months or years, who knows at the moment, and what the new normal will look like, who knows. But I think businesses have shown that they're both resilient and adaptable.
Thanks, Julie. Carolyn and Martin, on a more local level, what do you see in the East Midlands, and what are business owners taking away and speaking to you about for the future, Carolyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as been said earlier, that businesses were in complete shock to start with. Nobody knew how to handle the situation. There's been a lot of support available, and I think people will take from this, as Martin said, the technology available, different ways of working, new initiatives. Those that are, looking at all of that will probably survive going forward. I guess there's an issue with those people that are sitting back and wondering what they're going to do. They were perhaps struggling beforehand. So it's a case of, using the advice that's out there in terms of your accountant, your bank, ourselves. We can, hand-holding to see what is available to turn it into a positive going forward. Thanks,
Carolyn. Martin?
I think I'd echo much of what Carolyn and Julie have said already. I think what always comes out of these things is that people will be innovative. They'll be entrepreneurial. People will see opportunity and grasp opportunity from what has been a period of adversity. And I think that's the real positive, that as a country and certainly in the region, there will be businesses that will come out of this and will thrive, either as a result of changes that they've made, adaptations that they've had to make that have been forced upon them, that will then be seen as being really positive moving forward. And I have no doubts that the economy will get back on its feet. It will take time. I think the government initiatives that have been put in place, I think, have been impressive, to be fair. The scale and the depth that they've tried to cover, and the speed with which they've got them done. I think that we touched on the furlough scheme earlier. I think I for one, was surprised at how quickly they managed to get that rolled out, and was pleased to hear from people that I'm talking to that the system worked when it went live online. And I think it'll be interesting to see what government support is put in place as we come out of lockdown. I think it's going to be crucial that the government don't just get to the end of the lockdown and say, okay, we've done our bit and we won't wash our hands of it now. That there'll be further need for schemes and support for business to encourage growth and new businesses, and to encourage people to have a go in reality. I think people need to be encouraged to start new business, and in order for the economy to thrive and grow going forward. So I think there will be positives that come out of this. There'll be an awful lot of negatives, but in truth, I think there's every opportunity for business to move forward as we come out of the lockdown and move to whatever the new normal will be, which at this moment in time, we can only guess, can we?
Absolutely. Well, that's a nice positive note to end on. I'd like to thank you all, Carolyn, Julie and Martin, and thank you to Begbie's Trainer for supporting today.